Okay.
All right, guys. My name's Tony Bigda, and we'd like to thank our room sponsor, Boscoyo Studios. We have Gil's here to talk about xLights 3D. Thanks, Gil.
Okay, thanks. This is Gil Jones. Sorry, I was somehow got bumped over into a different room, so it took me a minute to get switched over. I was here like 20 minutes early, but I don't know if you got my iPad. I think my iPad's connected, so if you guys want to see me, you could get the. I think I hit start video, but I don't know if it is it running. It's probably going to be different than the where my voice is coming through though. So also, I know I'm supposed to turn off annotations. Where do I do that?
Gil, I think they're turned off in the admin page for the room entirely. I'm not sure, but it would be.
All right. Well, I'll go ahead and just start.
Yeah. And
so this is going to be, talking about 3D layouts. I've
right.
probably done this.
Can you try your share screen to make sure it works, Gil? I'm sorry.
Oh, you're not seeing it? I did share screen.
Yeah, I'm not seeing it.
It's showing up for me on my iPad, and let's see. Brian says he sees it. Yeah, I'm logged in through a different device, and I see my own screen.
Can everybody see it on Zoom as a share screen?
Yeah, like there's.
Oh, there you go. Okay, we got it now. Thank you.
Yeah, so that was mine. Okay, so
cool.
So this is going to be about 3D layouts, and I was the one who originally had the idea to do this 3D stuff in xLights back in 2018. And I've done a similar presentation. So if you've seen this before, it's not going to be too much different because when I look at it, there's not really too many different things I think I can talk about. There are a couple new things that are in here that are different, but not anything that's very new if you've seen this presentation before. I'm just going to talk about introducing 3D, and when I added 3D, it did actually also add some features to 2D. So I'll real quickly go over, some of the 2D enhancements that happened when I added 3D. What you do to, switch your layout from 2D to 3D. I'll demonstrate how to add a house object into a 3D layout, and then I'll try to go through a lot of stuff with the 3D interface, how they add all the model types and how they get placed, and some of the mechanics of how you do selection, and how to use camera viewpoints to change, how effects could render onto your layout based on different camera angles. So this is just a quick bio screen they wanted me to make. I've been running a synchronized light show since 2011. I've been developing for xLights since 2015. Probably haven't been as much active lately. And probably because of my nicks, they wanted me to list stuff I like to do. So my other hobby is I like to build and collect arcade cabinets. And there's a few pictures of ones. Every cab you see there is actually completely built from scratch by me. And I do have a couple other ones that weren't built by me, but I just bought a Pac-Man that I'm restoring. I own a Defender cab that's original, and they wanted me to add something like a fun fact. I used to actually run my own backyard observatory and do asteroid discovery and pretty pictures, and I actually got featured on Picture of the Day one time. There's a link down here in the presentation and picture of a comet that I got an image of that got featured on that day. So introducing 3D.
All right.
So, first off, why did I develop 3D? Part of it was for the technical challenge. I had seen somebody. There's another program that existed out there for Lightorama where somebody had a product where you could design your layout in 3D for Lightorama, and it really didn't get that popular. But it always gave me the idea that I thought it was a good idea. I wanted to try to get that into xLights, and I had the vision that I wanted to be able to fly through my display while I'm looking at my preview, and kind of like I had a landscape designer program where I could design my house in 3D, and I said that'd be cool if we could do that in xLights and put the lights in here. The other thing that it provided benefit for was it allowed me to add pan and zoom features in 2D. Back before 2018, your two-dimensional screen was just frozen. You couldn't zoom in, you couldn't drag it around, and so adding the 3D positioning allowed me to add the 2D pan and zoom features. Do you need to use 3D? Not really, only if you want to. It still runs just fine in the 2D mode. Use 3D if you have a layout you think would benefit from it, or you just think the preview looks nicer. We got by without 3D for years, so it's not required. One thing I will say is everybody was worried about switching to 3D, back when it first came out. I don't know if that's probably not as much of a concern now, but what most people didn't realize was once they upgraded, even if they were still in 2D, their positioning behind the scenes was already upgraded to 3D. So even if like today, if you're using the latest xLights, you're using 3D positioning, whether you choose to look at the 3D view or not. We're just behind the scenes rendering a different perspective. So basically, if you're in 2D, you've got 3D positioning where all your third dimension positions are 0. So it's kind of like you're on a plane. So what are the benefits of using 3D? If you have a house that has lights facing multiple directions, in the past we created features where you could have different preview windows that could have different models in them. And I thought it was really clunky. Now you could just model everything in 3D, and you could have different cameras that you could jump around in the layout and be able to see your house from different angles. And then you could actually render from those different angles. And it, as I'll show later in the presentation, it'll change what you're seeing. You could also model large layouts. Like I know the guys who did the layout for Illumination Arizona, which was a drive-through light display. They were using, they had the whole display modeled in xLights, or people that have multiple houses on one street, you could actually, theoretically put all the lights for all the houses on there and be able to zoom out and see your whole block. You can render effects from multiple angles. It made it easier to have 3D models like the sphere, a cube, and then the custom 3D models you can add now. And I've always just thought the preview looks more awesome when it's in 3D. So I'm going to probably start trying to flip back and forth between xLights so you can see what I'm talking about here. So when I added the 3D positioning, it allowed to add panning, zooming, and there's also a way to use your trackpad. I kind of designed everything for the mouse, and other developers added the trackpad option in there. So I'm not real familiar with how to do things with a trackpad, but I know when it first came out, it was almost mandatory that you used a mouse. So if I jump over and show my display here. So this was my display a few years ago, probably 2017 before we switched to 3D. And so now if I roll my mouse wheel, I can zoom in and out of the display. And you couldn't do that before I did the 3D position option. There are things you can hold that middle mouse wheel down, and you could drag it. So all those features got added when the 3D option became available. So some of the excuse me, some of the other things, when you're in 2D, there's a bounding box that you can select. That'll actually show you your bounding rectangle for where you can render. That didn't used to be there. Another thing was this XO is center is, if you do that, you see it'll jump all your models over. That was to make it more aligned with jumping to 3D. So if everything was centered on the screen with this option checked, then it would be centered on the screen when you jump to 3D. But if you're just going to 3D and going to stay there, you didn't really need to worry about it. So let me go to the next slide. Switching to 3D. So it's really as simple as clicking the 3D checkbox. And so I wanted to show this what it would look like if I took my 2D display and just checked the box. You could, really you can try that without hurting anything. It's not going to actually change anything because, like I said, all your positions are already in 3D. So as I hold the left mouse button down, I can pan around and I can see all those models. So really when you're in 2D, if I turn this on edge and move it like that, you're really seeing a view. It's like that when you're in 2D. So it's almost like it's really 3D, except for you get more of that perspective. Things look like they're getting narrow as they get further away, like a train track effect. I'm glad I got some water here because my throat keeps getting dry. Okay, next slide was, all the models are now, on the XY plane, like nothing is shifted back in, depth wise yet. But what you will see when you switch immediately was that there are some models that do have some thickness to them that you never could see before. Like that tree model was always really a three-dimensional model, but it just never showed up like that. All the other models were flat. So if you want to take your existing display, put in 3D like this, now you can come in and highlight one, and now you have the option to start moving your models around in the display. And I'll go over that more later as I get into the other topics. Let's see. I was just suggesting that, if you want to keep all the models you have there, once you're switching over, you might want to select everything and then drag it over. Let me just see if I can demonstrate that. So if you hold down Shift and start dragging, I can highlight that whole display. And then there'll be a little handle there where the axis is. I can grab that red handle and I can move all my models over. So if I wanted to quickly get those models centered on that grid, I could do that. And to deselect, I'm double clicking in empty space. That's something I'll go over later as well. So let me go back. Now I want to just start with a fresh show folder so we can start going through some of this stuff. So I've got a clean one set up over here. I wonder if I can just keep, oh yeah, see it sliding. Well, that's probably not going to show it to y'all. I don't know why. I've got a weird thing happening with my xLights lately where when I go to drag the whole app around, it kind of lags and floats. It's a really weird effect. None of the other apps on my machine do that. So when you first switch to 3D, if you didn't have any models, you would see this green grid that we always draw by default. That's really just to try to help show you where we think the ground surface is. That's where xLights is going to show you, where that grid is where we're going to typically default to when you open the program. So that's where you want to start placing your stuff or move it over there if it's not already there. It can be removed. It has several parameters you can change, like you can change the width, the height, the line spacing, grid color, and then you can add more, you can change the angle. So let me just demonstrate some of that. So if you go to this tab right here where it says 3D objects, there's your grid line. So if I click it, it selects it. You could actually move that grid around. And if I click the handle, I'm going to go over some of this axis stuff I'm doing right now later. But you can grab that and change the scaling of it. I guess you can only do the x-axis. Oh, and that one's, it's because it's rotated. So that axis, the green one does that one. You can change the line spacing. So if I wanted these tighter, I could say it's 20 pixels between for the grid. I can make the grid smaller or bigger by changing these width and height values. Or I could say I don't want to delete the object, but I want to, I don't want to see it right now. I could just go up here and uncheck the active box, and that'll temporarily get rid of it. And then the axis lines, there's like a red and blue line that you can look at. Let me make this back to 50 so it's not so dense. That just shows you where 0, 0, 0 is in the center. The red line's your x-axis, the blue line's your z-axis, and then green's your y going straight up and down. You could come in and say, I want another grid lines object. They typically default, or they will default to being straight up and down like that. Well, they're both selected. Let me just select that one. So you can come in, you can go to the size location, and you could, well, I could do it with the handle, or I can type the number. But you can come in, you could rotate that grid, and you could say, I want it to be a different color. You know, most people don't use extra grids, but I'm just showing you the features there if for some reason you wanted to have multiple grids. So let me go back and just delete that one. So you can select any object up here that you've added to the display. You could right click and select delete to get rid of it, or you can just make it not be active to hide it, like I said earlier. And let me go back to the presentation. So I just went over this, but so we do have a 3D objects tab and a models tab. And the reason I did it like that was if I started mixing 3D objects and models all in one space, it was going to be hard to figure out, you know, do you want to select your house or do you want to select the model in front of the house? So to separate those into two tabs allowed me to make the selection logic only work on whatever tab you had selected. So, you know, you can't select any 3D objects if you're not on the 3D objects tab. And that's just kind of a way to hide them, you know, because usually once you draw your 3D objects, you just want to leave them there and you want to be selecting your models. Oh, and that was just second bullet here. I'm talking about that tab becomes active whenever you use the add object button to add another 3D object. So if it wasn't selected, it'll become active just so, you know, because you've just added a 3D object. And I already went over delete. So first thing most people want to do is add a house. So by default, you saw when I switched from 2D to 3D. Let me just go back to 2D here. Let me see if I can find my house picture. It's probably in one of my older. There's one of them. So when you switch to 3D, you can see that picture disappears. We don't typically show the background picture from your 2D screen on 3D, so we hide that. If you wanted to add it back in, there is a way to do that. You can come up here to create a new image, and then you could select your background image if you really wanted to see one. Like I could say, create a new image. I click wrong there, and then I could change that image. And I think it's super tiny because I didn't drag my box out. Let's see. Let me just make my scale bigger and see if we can see it. Oh, looks like it's, well, I made the scale the wrong direction, but I probably better just delete that. But see, you're adding that as a model, so it doesn't work as nice as the background image in the other display. But I am going to show images later, so I don't want to get too tied up with that. What else was on this slide talking about? Place all their miles. Yeah, I was just saying, I've seen some people, they they come in here, they draw all their models. They don't have a 3D house at all, but it almost looks like it's 3D because they placed all their models as if there was a house there, and it almost ends up looking like the shape of the house, and it's pretty cool. But let me get back to the presentation where I'll show you. Well, no, I guess I got to back up. I thought I had. I guess that's not in the order I thought it was. I'm going to get to it in 2 slides. So the next one was placing an image in 3D, which I just stumbled on doing. But you can use the Add Object button and select an image. So there's 2 ways to add an image. I was selecting a model that was an image, but really I should have been over here on the 3D tab doing Add Object Image. And then I can select my image. No, this is, I must have my screen twisted. That's why I'm getting turned around. So then I could go in here and put the scaling, scale that down. So that's the best way. If you want to insert your edit as an image object, say line ground, but and center it properly. You can also come in and add additional images. I could say I want to add another image object. And then I'm going to go in here and let me go to the folder I'm in. And I have this picture of some grass. I can add that. I can add that image in here. They're both selected. So I want that to be rotated 90 degrees around the x-axis. So I can put it on the ground. So I can do that, and then I could stretch it out however big I want it. And what this would be useful for is, let's say you wanted to try to place your images like what I did. You can see it in the presentation. Is I took a, that's not the presentation. Down here in the bottom, you can see I took a Google Earth image of my house, and I had that on the ground for a while, and I used that to place the models, and I got kind of like an overhead view of my house, and it helped me lay out where my models were landing in, in proper proportion. And then, once I got everything placed, I just deleted that image. When you place an image, you can also set things like transparency. So that's too bright. I can come up here and say I only want that to be like 50%. Pretty much wherever you want to dial the transparency, and you can make it where it's really almost hidden. Okay, so that's how to add images as image objects. Go back and delete these. And then I believe the next slide I'm going to be talking about how to actually use a house model. So instead of an image, it's more impressive if you can create a 3D image of your house. Right now, unless someone's added something I don't recall seeing, OBJ is the current mesh format that we support importing. And it's not just houses. You could bring in any shape you want. I did something once where just to be cute, I showed how I brought in like all these little Pac-Man figures and had them moving around on top of an image of a Pac-Man screen, just to kind of show some features of what you could do. Wasn't anything practical, but it was just kind of showing capabilities. There's many programs like SketchUp and Blender that have a way to, you can create your models and export them in OBJ format. And I've never used it, but I know a lot of users have used the Hover program to create a 3D mesh of their house. That creates a really high triangle count than if you draw it yourself. So I don't expect the performance to be quite as good in xLights when you're drawing, 100,000 triangles. But I think if you use Hover, I think it's kind of like you got to like try to contact the company, get them to send you a copy of your file because you're using a trial version, and I think it's probably an expensive program. So from what I hear, most of the xLights users don't typically buy the program. They try to contact the company, get them to send the file. You know, I drew mine in SketchUp and imported that way. And on this next screen here, you'll be able to go back. Hopefully I'll get this presentation out to the guys where they can provide it, and you can go back and reference this. And because it's got, like, if you are using SketchUp, I show here the menus that you can use to get down and export as an OBJ. I've also got some tips here on the options you want to use. So you need to swap your Y and Z coordinates. So if you're using whatever program you're using, if your house looks like it's flipped up sideways, you probably need to swap your Y and Z coordinates because, you know, a lot of programs use Z as up and xLights is using Y as up. The other thing, you want to triangulate all the faces, export the edges if you want to be able to see the black lines on the edges of your house. Texture maps, if you want any of the textures, like you see I have a roof texture on mine. If I want that, I need to export that texture. And you don't really need to export two-sided faces. That would mean like all the inside surfaces that I can't really see would get exported as well. So you'd have all your inside and outside textures. And then one tip I threw in here, if you do work in SketchUp, whenever you see a surface that looks blue instead of white, you're really looking at the back side of the surface because any surface can be flipped. What'll happen is if you have a blue surface like that and then you add a material to it, when you import it in xLights, and you know, because you weren't doing the two-sided faces, that's an inside face, but it's being shown on the outside because it's flipped. You really need to go back in SketchUp, select that face and do a reverse faces. It'll turn white, and then your material will show up when you bring it into xLights. So let me just check my next slide. Excuse me. So now I've created my object in SketchUp. I want to get it into xLights. So this screen kind of gives some tips on how to do that, but let me go out and try to actually execute this. Let's make that a little bigger. So you go to add object, mesh, and it's gonna stick a mesh object on the screen. And on the OBJ file parameter, you want to navigate to where you have your house object. And there's also, you can't see it, but all the textures and everything should be in this directory as well. So that just brought my house in. And you know, if it comes in, it's really tiny, or if it's really big, you're going to have to go down here to the scales, and you might need to scale it. I've seen it happen to people both ways. They didn't realize how big or small they drew it in the other program. I would typically go back in your source program and fix the scale and then re-import it, just so if you ever have to bring it in again, you're not fixing it every time. Same goes with any kind of rotations you might have to do. Now for me to place this or to move it around my screen, I can't see that axis. See that axis hidden up there in the middle? So what you want to do is go over here and check this box. This is mesh only, and that'll expose these handles so that you can come up here and make your adjustments. Kind of hard to see the green one because everything else is green also. But this is how you would initially get your house located, wherever you want to place it on your grid. And once you got a place, you can turn that back off. Just like the green grid, you can turn that whole thing off if you want to. So make it inactive. It's not deleted, but it hides it. So let's see. Go back to presentation. I think whenever everything I have here. Yep, next slide. That was everything I just went through. That's an old screenshot. I actually removed that diffuse colors feature. It used to be a way to try to colorize your surfaces if you didn't import textures, but it ended up getting messy later and wasn't needed. So that parameter is gone. So now I want to start going over, some of the how to place models and some of the other items in the 3D layout interface. So let's see. I'm going to go over rotating, zooming, and panning. So rotating, I'm gonna kind of do this all mouse driven, how to do it with a mouse. You would left click and hold to start dragging, and whichever way you drag will determine which axis starts moving. So if I left click here and start going left to right, it'll spin it around the y axis. If I go up and down, it spins it around the x axis. You can also zoom by using the mouse wheel. And I believe we tried to make it, after several requests, we tried to make it a smart zoom. So like if I'm over this, it's not perfect, but you'll see like wherever I got my cursor will change the zoom point. So if you want it to zoom straight into this object, you want to get close to the center of the object. It's really wherever that axis handle is where it's going to try to, or wherever that axis handle is hidden under there, that's where it thinks the center of that object is. But if you zoom like up in the corner, you can see it's going to zoom to there. And that helps if you have a large display and you're trying to get to some tree that's way back here. So it's just makes it easier to try to zoom and then spin around and get to multiple objects that are oriented around your screen. And panning, let's see, left, right pans. There is something I implemented called smart panning. So depending on what the angle you're looking at is, it changes which axis is panning. So you hold down the mouse wheel to pan the screen. So if I go to a top view versus, let's see, what am I thinking? I guess you'd have to see how it used to work for me to really describe what I'm talking about. Originally, the panning was kind of weird and clunky, so I tried to make it so it detected, once you move past a 45-degree angle, it instead of panning, along one plane, it switched to the other plane. So whichever plane you were closest to, it would pan that direction and make it look a little smoother. I think hopefully now it's more intuitive and just does what you think it should do based on what view you're looking at. Okay, so enough of that. So the axis handles. I basically copied this from Blender, and the axis handles, the red one's always the x-axis, green is the y-axis, and Z is the blue axis. And this first one you see with the arrowheads, that's a translate when you want to translate the object. The scale tool would be squares when you want to scale an object, and the rotate tool is when it looks like arcs. And you rotate between the different tools by clicking on the orange box in the middle. The other thing is the handle turns yellow when you hover over it. So if you're having trouble knowing whether you're over it, look for that handle to turn yellow to know that the program thinks you're over top of the axis handle. Not every axis tool is available for every model. Like there's no way to scale a single line model. We really just keep the position of the two corners, and we don't even show a scale tool for that type of model. And there's a few other models that will have a special type of handle, like arches, candy canes, and icicles. They have a third handle for determining like the height of the candy cane or arch, and also the angle. So before I jump, let me Let me just demonstrate what I just talked about a little bit. So if I drop an arch model down, so if I click, you can see it cycle through, and you can see this one doesn't allow scaling either. So when I switch, it's just, I've got the option to rotate. Or to translate. You can also see how these other handles turn yellow when you hover over them. So you can click on them and then it changes the which handle's highlighted. This is one of those. Oh, looks like the selection point's a little off on that. Probably because it's rotated. So this was one of those third handles that allows you to control the height. Just let me delete that, guys. Sometimes they get a little funky. Let's see. So I'm gonna go through a lot of these models and show you how to place them. Let me just see. Not doing too bad on time. They gave me a little more time this time. That's why I tend to go kind of fast because usually I only had an hour and I was always having trouble getting through the presentation. So inside xLights, behind the scenes, there's really only four different categories of models. There's what we call a box model, a 2-point model, a 3-point model, and the polypoint models. So all models fall into one of those 4 categories. And basically what that means is they have, that changes like what types of handles they have. Like for box models, there's always going to be 4 corners, and you can always change those 4 corner handles. For a 2-point model, like a single line, you're going to have 2 handles that set the endpoints for that model. Arches, candy canes, and icicles are going to have those 3 points because that 3rd point controls the height and the angle of the model. And of course, a polypoint model, if you haven't seen it, has any number of points, and every point's going to have a handle that you can control. I got a note here that typically the model placement is on the ground, or which is the ground is the XZ plane or the vertical XY plane, based on what I thought was common for each model. And what I mean by that is typically you're going to put a tree on the ground. So I made it so they start out. Let's see, do I have that grid? Keeps bugging me every time. I thought I had these set to crate on the ground. Here, let me see where that's placing that guy. Well, it's actually not placing it on the ground. I don't know if that got changed or not. I thought I had these all starting on the ground. If I zero out the Y, yep, that's not going to do it either. Well, I'm going to just have to assume something might have changed. Used to be able to just plot these down. They all appeared nicely on the ground. But now it takes looks like it takes a little bit more work. Or you used to be able to right click and say align with ground, and it would put it there. That's why I just wanted to check and make sure my grid line was on the ground, because maybe that's what's messing me up. That could be. Let's see. So there's the ground for that guy. So let me go back, select that, align with ground. Okay. All right, that's much better. So that's what was messing me up. So nobody messed anything up. I was just messed up my grid when I was demonstrating it. Let me see if that'll go. Then let's try and get that down. Yep, it is a little tedious at first to get things positioned, I'll admit. If you have a picture there, it's a lot easier to see because you can tell when the object starts disappearing into the picture, and then you know you've gone into the ground. So like I was beginning to show, when you create things like a tree here, they start out on the ground, but if you went to something like a single line model, it's actually going to use the XY plane. So when I click and drag, that's going to be like centered on that grid because that's where the XY plane is. So a single line is going to be created on the, always in that plane. So if you need it up closer, you're going to have to create it and then drag it forward or back. Yeah, let me just delete those. I'm getting a little bit of lag when I'm creating the models. And it seems like the performance isn't as good as I remember. All right, what's next? I was talking about the models. So, so you've got the tree and the sphere model. Those are box models. They can scale in depth. They default being placed, on the ground plane. You want to left click and drag to initially place them. And let me just delete that one, get out of the way. So I'm clicking the tree icon. I'm going to left click and then I drag to change how high I want it. And then I've let go and then it places it. I realize I probably should have talked about selection first. I think that's coming up though, but I'm having to do a lot of those features I haven't talked about yet to do what I'm doing. So I've got several tips here on how you can do different scaling based on holding key modifiers. So if I go here and I select that tree and I change it to the scaling tool. So if I grab this X handle for scaling, you can see it's only making the tree wider in the X direction. Now I'm still holding down the mouse key and I add the shift key into it. And now it's making the width and, the depth and the width of the tree are staying equal since shift is down. If I hold control down as well, now the whole tree scales evenly. If I let go of the whole thing and then just do the green one, then you're just getting like a height change. Let's see. So you see how it's going from the center? Well, if I hold down shift, then it says, oh, I want to keep that tree locked to the ground. So you can change the height of your tree, but keep it locked to the ground. Otherwise, if I let go of shift and it's doing like that, then you might have to right click and say back align it with ground. Okay, let's see if I went through all the combinations here. Yeah, I think I did. Like I said, you can come back and reference this presentation later for each of these models. Let's see. This is just talking about all the other box models. I'll do a couple of them. I don't think we need to go through every one. A matrix is a box model. So you click and drag to set how high you want that to be. Then you could, once you've placed it, and if you need to move it around and translate it, change to scale tool if you need to change its scale, change to the rotation tool if you need to change its angle. So pretty much all those translation, scale, and rotations I just did are available for almost every model. Let's see, we've got, a window frame. That's a box model. So all these work as box models. Okay, let's see, I'm gonna go into 2-point models. So I already kind of showed this before. A 2-point model always starts on the XY plane. You left click, it's gonna going to be where the green box starts, and then you drag. I would typically recommend you want to click and drag to the right. I don't know if we always ironed out all the issues, but sometimes things don't render correctly if you draw these things backwards. But we'll let you draw that backwards, but you really want to select that green start point and position it over on the left-hand side. So these points can be pretty much placed wherever you need them. You can select that center and rotate that line around if you need to. Really, when you rotate, we're just calculating a new position for these two endpoints. Okay, let's see. Center handle translates or rotates. Yeah, I think that's all been demonstrated. So 3-point models, arches and candy canes always default to the ground because that's typically where people have those in their yard. Icicles will act like the single line where they always will be initially drawn on the XY plane. Let's see. Yeah, the center and the endpoints are going to work just like the 2-point models, but they're going to have the third handle that can change the angle. So I'll just demonstrate a few of these. So I click the arch model. I'm going to click and drag. And once that finishes, I can say, well, I wanted that to be 5 arches. And then if you needed to change, see, I don't have scale here because typically you would just grab this endpoint and shrink it in if you need to change scale. You can change that if you need to change the angle. Pretty much any of these points you can select to do all of these different kind of things. I noticed that angle there is kind of weird. I noticed it did a 180 flip as soon as I clicked the handle. Some of those things were really hard to get working right. I notice as soon as I let go after I draw it, I notice there's a little bit of a lag before it, I guess, redraws the screen and then lets me do anything else. There's that third handle if you need to change the height. Or I can drag this thing out and then go over here and say, actually, I have 8 candy canes. It's pretty easy to select things and place them. I put it on the ground. Like if I need to align with a corner, some people want to know exact numbers. I typically just start eyeballing things. Like I'll come in here and then say, and then I'll look at it from that angle and say, okay, that looks lined up. Let me look at, oh, it's not lined up there. So let me drag it in, and I just kind of eyeball it from 2 different angles, and that's how I line points. Yeah, I think you could get things pretty close. Some people want it to be down to like 1 pixel accuracy, but I think like that looks good enough for me. If you really want to zoom in here, yeah, it's a little bit off. But you can pretty easily, quickly place stuff down and position it. Let me get back to here. Okay, the polyline's an interesting one. So they will always draw initially on the XY plane, just like a single line. You want to left click and start dragging to do the initial line. And then, well, actually, so it's a little bit different than like placing a single line. So you're going to click and let go. That places the initial point. Then you start moving your mouse. And then when you click again, it's going to start placing their point. So every time you click, you're going to get a new point. And then a lot of people have gotten into this and can't figure out how to end it, to escape out of the polyline, you want to hit the escape key. And I've heard people that couldn't figure it out and restarted their whole computer. So probably be easier just get in here and draw one. Let me get some of this other stuff out of the way. It's a little laggy. I probably could select multiple items here and delete them. Okay, so here's the polyline. Select that. And I'm gonna click once. Now I'm not holding down any mouse buttons now. I'm just moving the mouse around. I click again, that sets a point. Click again to set a point. Click again to set a point. Now I'm gonna hit the escape key. And that ends it. So now, just like before, the orange handle is still going to be in the this, what is like the calculated center of all those points. And you can select any one of the points individually to change its location, as well as make it, do something in the Z direction as well. Another thing, you can select the line segment. You right click and say, I need to add a point in there. And then, so I just added a point. Another thing you can do, you could select that. It's not letting me select. Why is that? There we go. Right click and delete that point. Now I can select that line segment, right click and say define curve. Now, what that should have just done, let me select that again. If I select here and pull up, there's really these red handles that are hidden under there. So it's going to draw a Bezier curve now based on this red handle's angle and position. So you move the two red handles around, and that allows you, if you had something like a curved driveway, you could place this thing on the ground, and you could get it to be following along. Let's see if I can do it without too much. Here's where you guys start changing your angle so you can see where your points are. So basically you can put that thing on the ground. I'm not going to spend time to make it perfect, but you get the idea. You can put that on the ground and make it follow the curve of a driveway. Probably be much easier. I'll just start from scratch real quick. If you really want something on the ground like that, I would first just go up here like I did and draw it. And then go down to size and location. Well, I guess you can't do a master. I guess you'd have to go here and do a master rotation of that. Rotate that down till it's the angle that's almost flat with the ground. And get that placed, and then start messing around with curving the points. So if you really want this to be somewhere on the ground like that, probably put it down flat like that first. And then come in and say I want to define the curve. So it just shows you some of the features you can do with a polyline. It's pretty powerful. Since I got a little bit of time, I'll show one more thing with polyline that some people don't always get the idea of, but let me just try to draw draw an object here. I'm going to go in here and I'm going to draw something in here. Let me add some more points to this, make it denser. So I don't know if I did exactly what I wanted. Let me just go back to this a simple line. Let's go down here to this guy here. So there's this concept I've always called it like lifting the pen. You know, so this has basically 3 line segments. Now, if you go to individual segments and expand that, I could say, well, that has 0 segments. I mean, that has 0 pixels in that segment. So it would hide that segment. And then you could say how many you have in the other segments. So you end up with something that looks like it's not one contiguous piece, but really it is. You've just like hidden the middle part of it. So using that, you can actually draw an object. Like I've used a polyline to draw all of my roof line with one polyline object, and then I use those gaps to basically lift the pen. Let me demonstrate real quick. I'll select my house, and let me lower the brightness. That thing's really bright. So I'll make it like, oh, made it too dark. That's the 0. So let's say I was going to draw a polyline. It's probably not going to draw exactly where I want, but let's say I was going to put it here and go across this front roof edge. And let me make that a little denser. So then you'd have to go and you'd have to get it up there placed up against your house, which it takes a little bit of work, but you can get pretty good at it. I'll just show kind of how I would do it. See, just learn something or that's something I guess I can talk about. Because of the angle, if you get completely edge on to the XY plane, it makes it really hard for the program to calculate where your mouse is in relation to that plane. That's why that thing starts shooting off the screen. So I kind of like use it, see how it's going to disappear behind the surface? That's how I figure out, okay, it's right on that surface now. Then I can start grabbing my points, positioning them up here against that surface. And I won't make this too perfect, but just to demonstrate. So if I wanted those to be 3 line segments, but I had to draw 5. So I want to go into that object and select individual line segments, and then I want to tell it I've got 30 pixels on that one. I'm going to blank out that one, 30 pixels on that one, blank out that one, and then 30 pixels on that guy. So now I've got a single polyline object that is doing my roof line, and it's going to make it kind of nice, because you're going to, when you go to your sequencer, you're going to have each one of those lines is going to, you could basically drop an effect on that and render to that whole roof line, just dropping one effect without having to group anything. They're already grouped in the polyline, and each polyline segment, if you really want something on just that one segment, you're able to do that by expanding the model and dropping something on just that line segment. You could, I think you can also name those if you want. So I just wanted to, since I had a little bit extra time, I just wanted to demonstrate how you could do that. All right, let's see. Model selection. Okay, it's good that I'm doing that now since I've been showing you how to select it all along. So as you move the mouse around the layout, it's gonna highlight objects with a white bounding box, and that's how you know that the mouse is hovering over that model. And then if you click, it's gonna actually select that model. Once you select the model, you can release the mouse button and it stays selected. And that's just because a lot of times you're gonna need to, let me just drop a tree here. So as you hover over the different models, the bounding box is going to highlight. So then if I click, that selects it, turns yellow, and you get your axis handle to move it. Then that allows me to like just pan around while it's still selected. So that's the reason why, you know, you're able to let go of the mouse and then move around, so you can zoom in on your handles and do what you need to do. But to release that, you can double click out into somewhere where there's nothing else, or you can hit the escape key that will deselect. And let's see, yeah, let me show you how to do multiple selections. So if you hold down the shift key and drag to select a group of objects, which I'll jump over and demonstrate, you won't see like an overall square being drawn as you select, but what you'll see is that as models get inside of your selection area, they'll get their bounding boxes activated. And then you can, if you want to move them as a group, you can then hold down the shift key and drag them around. And there's always going to be one of the objects is going to have the axis handle. That's basically the primary point, and that can be changed as well. So let me just go in here and draw a few of those. Let me get rid of these. Okay, so let me get a few more trees going. Okay, so I'm going to double click the deselect. So if I go over here to this corner, hold down shift and drag, as I'm moving the mouse around, you can see it's going to add or remove guys from the group. And then I let go of everything and those stay selected. And I can move that around. Now, if this works the way I remember, I should be able to hold down shift and do another drag to add more objects in to the selection. The other thing I can do is hold down control and I can change. Well, the first click is going to say, I want to be primary. Second click is going to remove it from the group. Another click adds them back in. Another click makes him the primary. What I mean by primary is if I went in here and said that I want to rotate, that's the guy they're going to rotate around. But if I want to hold down control and select this guy, oh, I deselected accidentally. Now this is going to be primary. So really wherever that axis handle is going to be, you know, the guy that controls, you know, where the action is centered. And let's see. I just went through all that of what happens with the control key. Let me show one more thing with that. I don't think I had in the presentation, but if you select a bunch of items like that, then you have some right-click options to do some alignments. And that's another case of where whichever guy you have selected, and let me just make sure this is working the way I think. I put in these guys in different spots. So I'm going to go control click and add all those in. I'm going to control click here, make him the primary. Right click and say I want to align the front edge. So you can see all those models got aligned with the front edge of whoever my primary was. So now if I click this guy, put him somewhere, and then add everybody in, I can say I want to align to the back edge of that guy. Now everybody's going to move up to, to his edge. So that's what the primary is important for when you do things like alignments. It's going to make that guy be the one that controls everything. Well, the other thing, I think in the presentation, I think it was wrong. It said you had to hold down shift to move as a group. Right now, I have nothing. I'm not holding down the mouse or any button or anything. And if I just go in here and left click on that arrow, they move as a group because they're selected. So you don't have to hold it down to move it. I think that's more of the way you have to do it in 2D. Okay, so not the last, but the next slide, talking about camera viewpoints. Oh, you actually got my video going there. I didn't notice that. Let's see if I actually had that thing centered or not. So camera viewpoints are basically different angles in your layout. So let me go back here. Let's say, hey, I want to look at my house from the side here. You can right click, you can say save current viewpoint, and I could call that side view. You go back here to the front, save that as front view. Probably a good idea to do this because sometimes you might like zoom way out and I can't see anything. Now I've rotated, I don't know where anything is. And I can't, well, there it is if I zoom back in, but you could get yourself messed up where you can't even find your stuff. You either have to exit the program or you need a viewpoint unless we've, let's see, reset. Yep, reset. We had a reset to fix that, but it used to be you could just say load viewpoint, front view. Now you got that view back. You could load side view. And now you're back at the side view. So that's a way to quickly create some preview locations and angles that you can use to jump around in your layout. But they also can be used for rendering. So if I wanted to render from this angle, because all our effects render as if it's a 2D surface. So it's going to take everything I'm looking at from this angle and project it onto a 2D plane and then render the effect. But if I go up here and I save a viewpoint called top view, then that's going to render everything from the top down. And you can see that I kind of have another slide showing what I just did. Let me just drop down a few more. Let me put this in multi-mode and just drop down a set of trees here. And let me just go hide that house so I can just see these trees. Whoop, I'm still in multi-mode. And just in case I need it, I'm going to shift select and group all these. And I'm going to right click and say create group from selection and call it trees. Now I'm going to create a blank sequence. Let me just get this so it's a little larger. Okay, let me drop down the butterfly onto that model. Let's see if we can show what I'm talking about. So if I'm looking at this from the top, that's with a default buffer. So let me change this to a per preview render buffer. And then once I do that, I have this option to change which camera angle it's being viewed from. So if I say top view now, you see how it changed the way that affects rendering. So now it's more like a typical butterfly where, you know, it has the red dot down here in the bottom left-hand corner. If I say side view, you'll see it now renders differently because now it's as if you're looking at the effect from this angle. And I can actually change it. I can go in here and say load viewpoint, top view, load viewpoint, side view. So you can actually see how that looks like the butterfly effect sweeping through there from that angle. I switch this to front view and then make the camera angle for the effect front view. Now you can see that effect is rendering from this angle. So that's how you quickly can change the angle that your effects are rendering from. Let's see if I don't think I had too much more. I actually got through everything. Oh, I forgot the new feature added terrain grids. So let me go over that. I saved that for last since it was a new item. So I'd kind of wanted to do this for a while and I finally got working sometime, I can't remember how many months ago, maybe in December. And it's the same as that original green grid, except now you can grab the points in that grid and you can change them. So if you had a yard that was unlevel, it'd be an easier way to try to map the terrain of your yard, because some people want to try to make their display look as close to their yard as possible. And so this will be one way to do that. Or, you know, you could really use this to draw anything you want. I mean, if you wanted to draw a square shed, you could do that, you know. So let me just go and demonstrate it in the program. Let's see. Let me close this just so it doesn't mess with me. And go to layout. I hit the delete key. Thought that would delete. Let me right click that and say delete group. Delete models. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go over here to 3D objects. I'm going to hide that grid. And then I'm going to say add object terrain. It's going to look just like that green grid, but this is really a different object. Because with this object, you can now go down here and select edit terrain. And now as I'm moving around, each one of these points is now editable, and you can change the height of each of these points. And that could get to be a little, you know, a little tedious to draw exactly what you want, but you know, the feature is there. And to help out, one thing I did was create what I call brush size. So let's say I made my brush size 4, and then I select a point. Now it's going to move up something with a, you know, a radius of like 4 from the center. So I guess it's going out to there. So let's say I would reduce that to 3. Now it's going to pull that up, reduce it to 2. So you can kind of almost get a little bit of a curved slope going there. Let's see, go over here and pull that up. So you can pretty much do whatever you want with this. And then once you have your terrain drawn, you could go, well, before or after, it'll work either way, but you could come back here and I've got a piece of grass image that I just selected, so you can put it onto that grid. I made it quick so you could hide the image real quick if you want to. Let's say you want to keep editing, you could quickly hide that image or add it back in. You can also hide the grid if you don't want to see the grid in there. And it also has all the other grid parameters like grid color, grid sizing, line spacing. One thing I will recommend, I'll show you why right here, is if I come in and tell it that my line spacing's denser, like I say, now it's 20 pixels, it's going to do that, and it just made it denser, but it took all my existing points and it left them in the array the way they were, so now everything's scrunched. So you really want, I haven't worked out a way to figure out how to try to keep all those points close to where they originally were. I did work on it and never got it working, but right now my recommendation is if you want to use this object and you want to change this grid spacing to be able to do more finer detail, change your line spacing first and then start moving your points around. Otherwise, you're going to get stuck with something like this. And if it gets really out of whack, I just make a super huge brush size, select a point, and then do that. Now I've pretty much flattened it back out. So that's the terrain object. And, I didn't go over this one because I didn't add this. I think Keith added it. But there's a way to add a ruler, and you can put this on the screen. And I didn't write this, so I'm not 100% sure, but I believe the idea is to take this object and place it somewhere. I don't know why I can't select there. It's because the points were too close together. It's not highlighting. That's what's fooling me. But so you could come in here and you could place this somewhere, maybe say on like a section of your house. And then you come over here and you say, that real length is 3 meters. And I think that will make it so that your point system for scaling and placing things gets scaled to so that the numbers that you're entering in all your fields match some type of real life measurement. I haven't actually used this feature before, so I'm not an expert on that piece, but I just did want to show it because it was under the, options for 3D stuff. In fact, I just noticed, oh, you can only add the ruler once. That's why it disappeared. So you can only have one ruler. All right. And that was all I had for now. I'm probably a little bit early, but they'll give more time if anybody does happen to have questions. Anything we probably have time to actually demonstrate something. But that was all I had to show. So I wasn't following along the chat. Let me see if there was anything that I can answer. Setting up my house in SketchUp. You mean draw the whole house? That took me like several days. Yeah, I don't even know if I have the version I used to draw it, because right now I'm using SketchUp Make, and I think I paid for a paid version of SketchUp back when I drew my house. So I'm not exactly. It would probably take me too long to figure out how to get that pulled up in SketchUp right now. Let me turn off that editing so it won't be selecting those points. Wonder what happens if you delete the ruler after you create it. At least luckily so far, nothing crashed. Well, I don't hear any audio. I guess they probably muted everybody. Yeah, I guess we got plenty of time. It's fine with me if let's see, that's the question about how to match up the 2D view and picture with the 3D view. Let me just jump back over to my other one I started with.
Okay, Gil, people can unmute themselves now.
Okay. So like I showed earlier, if I hold down Shift and select I gotta go back to my models. Select the entire display, shift it over to here. I mean, the best you're never going to get to look exactly the same between the two views. If I go back to 2D and I check that box XO center, now my stuff is pretty close to where I originally had it. Let me highlight it all, hold down. I could hold down Shift. Oh, it's Control. Let's see. That's about where it lines up on my house. And then if I go back to 3D, then it's somewhat lined up here. So if you wanted it to be able to quickly switch, you would want, have it lined up here the way you want. You want to check the XO center box. And then when you come over to this view, that's going to be where things are, and that's where you're going to need to work. That's always going to be a little different. Like, see here, this isn't going to look like it's on the ground, so you might want to come over and select your grid lines and move that up. But it's got to do with, like if you look at this distance, see these outer corners here from there to there? That's wider than the back end because of the perspective of the way it's being drawn in 3D. So in 2D, this line right here is actually going straight backwards. So it basically takes everything on the screen. It kind of like, it shows no depth to it. It stretches it out. So you go from a, straight on perspective angle to what this is called an orthographic angle. And this is just a straight on perspective view. Let's see, several options. Let's see, several options to set up a house in 3D without drawing from scratch. Oh, someone's just trying to help out on how to draw. I helped someone a couple years ago draw their house, and I probably did it in 30 minutes, but it was a real simple version of a house. I didn't go into the kind of detail I did on mine. Mine, I had the advantage. I'd already modeled my house in this program called Landscape Designer. And so I actually had gone outside with a transit and I'd measured heights and distances. So my house was like pretty accurate. And so I went into that program, wrote down all my numbers, and then used that to create my drawing in SketchUp. So it's actually a pretty detailed, accurate drawing of my house. Most people are going to just use hover or draw something a little more simple.
Can you use multiple terrain grids?
Sure, you should be able to go in. Here and let me just hide that one.
My house sits kind of up on a little knoll, and the front yard slopes one way, the side yard slopes another way.
Yeah, so if I have this guy, I have to jump over to where my grass is. So if I had that guy there, then I could come in add the second one. Whoop. Things lagging on me. So yeah, I should be able to go in here and say I want to edit that guy, change him around, and now he's totally independent of the other one.
Can you slant it from back to front as a complete slant without having to go into that point?
Well, just like a normal model, I should be able to go down here and say I want to rotate that around the x-axis 20 degrees. So you can do that. But all the points are going to work as if they're straight up and down, because you can't move individual points any, outside of the grid, left and right. They have to go. You can only change the height of each of those points. You can change the angle of this whole grid and then still move all the points within it.
You could change the depth of the grid to where it meets up with the front of the house and then slants forward then, I guess.
Right. Let me turn off the edit here. I mean, just like anything else here, this can be positioned however you want it. Something like that. Now the program's not going to be smart enough to figure out, like if you do things like say align with the ground, it's not going to align with ground just means go to 0, 0, 0 for wherever it thinks the bottom of a model is. So if you wanted to now position models in here, you're still going to be having to come in here and set their height manually. You can see it kind of disappearing there, and I guess you could come in and just rotate that to be aligned with that angle if you wanted.
No, the yard slants, but my models are vertical with the horizontal plane.
Right, I'm just showing you, the capabilities. Let's
So
see.
if you had several different planes in a field or a yard or whatever, let's just say that it was flat in one spot and you had an angle and then flat again, would it be advisable just to create 3 grids and angle one of them to simulate that, or well, how would you tackle that?
Pretty much, it's your choice. I mean, you're just placing objects on the screen and whatever angle you want, and if it's easier to do it as 2 different objects, to just get that whole slope going the way you need it, you can do that. It's just gonna require you, like right here, this thing I would probably have to go back and align this object here so it's meeting up, right where the edge of that guy is. So it does something like that.
My question is if you add more objects, is that going to tax the computer?
I guess every time you add more things, it could slow it down. I haven't noticed much of a slowdown, and of course, there's people that are drawing stuff like that Illumination Arizona with 1,000 models or more when they're in 3D, and I can't remember. That's probably when you're starting to push the limits of what
Okay,
your
so just
computer
a
could
couple
handle
of
as far as 3D. But these terrain objects aren't adding much at all as far as it's just an array of points with an integer value for the height of each point. So it's really pretty easy for the 3D program to draw that and render a surface onto it.
okay.
Let's see, somebody's asking, does orientation matter? Rotate house and pushed it back on the default grid, and someone helped me Says bad thing. I wouldn't rotate my grid. If you had to rotate the house, I don't think that's too big a deal because you're just putting a 3D object down, and once you have it in place, it doesn't really matter what its angle is as long as you like the way it looks. Yeah, but typically like you saw me do, I like the house to be, I mean, I kept going back to SketchUp and making a few tweaks until when I imported it, my house was already the size I wanted and the angle I needed, just because I knew, I'm going to be importing that into other show folders later sometimes if I had to start from scratch, and I didn't want to have to figure out how to fix my rotation and scale every time I bring it in, but it really doesn't hurt anything if you've brought it in and positioned it the way you want it. I don't think that hurts anything. What I wouldn't do is I wouldn't like rotate my display like, oh, my house came in and it was facing down. I wouldn't rotate my display 90 like this and then start placing models, because then now all your models are facing the wrong direction, and a 2D renderer is going to always think that your models are oriented this way when you actually drew them this way. So that would be what someone was talking about. Never rotate your display to match an imported house model. You want to rotate the house model to be oriented correctly in the default display. And what I mean by default is wherever that original grid drew, that's going to be, where the X and Z ground plane is. And when you render, it's always going to render as if you were looking at it directly on from like a 2D angle like that. Let's see.
Can I
You
ask
can
a
see
question
my,
about the way it renders? So you say it renders straight on. Obviously, if you've got two sides of a house, and you put things on the side, you need to have it render from a different viewpoint.
yeah,
Is that right?
what can get tricky is if you're rendering like from a left side, everything. Well, I guess it depends on what models you're dropping it on. Like if you really only wanted to render to the models there on that side, you'd have to have a group that only has those models. If you render to everything in your display from that angle, then anything that's along the plane that you're rendering is going to be the same color all the way down. So that's the complaint people have had. Like say if they had a corner on a house, that side edge of the house is typically going to almost be like a slice of the same color going all the way down the plane.
Yeah, because it looks at the side of the model rather than the front of the model.
Yeah, it'd probably take me a minute to set up a
So I've
demonstration
got
of that.
a hedge that goes around the side of our house, but it curves through 90 degrees, which I'm planning to put arches along, but I'm wondering how to draw that in. So at the moment, I've just got everything on the front of the house, so that renders absolutely fine. But as you curve around the corner with your models, which is easy enough to draw in 3D, when you come to render it, it gets to a point where you obviously go beyond a certain angle, and then the arches don't render properly. They start to look, xLights obviously starts to look at the side of them rather than the front of
Right.
them.
So a lot of that's also got to do with whether they're being rendered as part of a group or individually. If you drop a marquee effect down on to an arch model, it's not going to care what angle that thing is on the screen. It's going to properly do that effect. But if you start rendering something that's like a per preview effect where it actually depends on how it's drawn on the screen, then yeah, it's going to draw. Basically, it's like you take everything that's in the 3D view and project it forward onto the screen, and that's your 2D render surface. So it's basically going to map a grid over top of the window, and wherever the pixels fall, that's where they land on your render buffer. And the other feature I showed where you could say, oh, I've got side view, it's going to do the same thing. It's just going to now rotate the view, and then it's going to project all the pixels forward, and then it's going to, create that render buffer. So the only way to really control which objects are being rendered would be like to have like groups that only have the models that look correct from that angle, that the effect's dropping on. But if you start trying to drop a whole house effect onto your entire house, you're never going to be able to get to look right from multiple angles. You're always going to have to use groups and then use the camera preview for the, whichever group is in those other weird angles.
Right.
Or you have to drop effects individually on those components, and use effects that look good on those items.
Okay.
Definitely gets more challenging when you start trying to, make effects look right from multiple angles.
Thanks.
All right, do we have any other questions or anything I could demonstrate? Probably could have gotten by with a 90-minute presentation.
Yeah, I just had one other question kind of about the layout and like how it's rendering. If you do all that in 3D and you spend all the time and effort to align them correctly, don't you lose quite a bit if you're rendering it in 2D? I just feel like that seems counterintuitive to spend all the time and effort to make everything 3D if it doesn't render that way.
Well, it's more of like being able to look at your preview, like I said, so, a lot of it's just, some people like to be able to model it and have it, look like, you're going to be able to see it in the preview of what it's going to look like to, now you can spin it around and see, okay, this is what my show's going to look like from that side angle, whereas you can never do that before.
Okay. I guess my hang up is I have some icicles that follow my roof line and oh, I'm sorry. My bad. Never mind.
Luckily, nobody's come to my door. You'd hear my dog.
We can see your wife in the kitchen back there cooking though.
Yeah. I told her I was going to be on camera. Here, they say everybody can see you cooking. You can see my Defender cabinet back there too.
So if your house is sitting on a corner, well, actually it's sitting kind of catty corner, and you got the majority of your display on the front, but yet you have some more on the side, you're going to have to then group that on the side and actually apply different effects to that side view.
I mean, if you're trying to do like whole house effects, then yeah, because they're going to suffer from like if you do it from the front, you're basically projecting the effect from the front. So anything facing perpendicular to the front of your house is going to get almost like solid colors sweeping down it, because it's just going to be like a slice.
Okay. Interesting.
And even if we went to where we tried to do more of a 3D rendering, it's still not easy for the program to figure out, how you want things to be oriented. I could see things like the perfect effect for 3D would be a shockwave. That thing is going to be like a sphere that expands, and it'd be easy to draw that in the 3D space. But a lot of the other effects, they could get really crazy. Like, how do you draw a 3D spiral? It's like, do you put that inside of a volume, and anything it hits in the volume gets rendered? Once you start trying to render 3D, it's almost like exponential as well on, right now, the time it takes to render to a 2D surface, if you add depth to it, if that's a 100 by 100 square buffer, then now it's 100 deep. You just made it 100 times longer to render it.
One last question on the ground plane. you can enlarge or shrink that ground plane. Let's say you got 100 foot by 100-foot yard or 150-foot yard. You can make that ground plane fit that size. Am I correct?
Yeah, this object, these terrain objects can be shaped, however you
No,
want to shape
I'm
them.
talking about the original ground plane.
Oh, the original green grid?
Yeah, the
Yeah,
original.
it's the same thing. That guy there, you can come in and make that be whatever size you want him to be.
Okay. Thank you.
And these guys work the same as that guy. It's just, that one. The only reason I left that original green grid there was because I assumed it probably renders a little bit faster. It doesn't have to deal with all the points. But both these guys work almost the same, except for the terrain object. You can throw an image on it and you can move the depth of each point. Or the
I can
height.
see the terrain object being something you use to place your objects and then getting rid of it. Or
Yeah, I
delete.
mean, I kind of did it for fun. I don't actually use it.
I have a question. I'm working on a commercial nightclub where we're modeling in xLights, and we're gonna have lights in the floor and the ceiling and all around you. So do you have any tips on doing that, where the view would be more from the center and the models would be around you?
I'm just trying to imagine that. I would think like if it's a lot of lights like DMX moving heads and things like that, that I don't know that you're going to get a lot of benefit trying to represent that in a 3D space other than seeing what it's going to look like. That's a case where I would almost like just try to render those in 2D, but use the 3D view to see what it's going to look like. If you get, but it takes a lot of work to get, if you drop moving heads into here, let me just drop one. That was that one. Oh, they had a different one. What is it? All the Servo 3D. Oh, I think you got to actually import that other one I'm thinking of. No, it's a download. That's what I'm remembering. I guess that does apply to 3D.
We're also gonna have a lot of pixels in the walls and ceiling and stuff like that. So, and we already have the bar modeled in SketchUp.
This was the one I was thinking of. So you could put whatever model you want. Like these here I've pre-created. You could actually draw these things, and these things are actually able to be created by a user if they wanted to. And I don't think we've had anybody create anything else, but this was drawn as 3 different 3D objects, and then they were kind of tied together through the features of the DMX object, where you can tie different servos to different objects and make them move individually. But what I was saying is you could represent where all of your lights are in the program, and you can come in here and say how they're oriented. Where is this model? I'm not seeing the orientation. Oh, way up here. Yeah, there's just tons of things to learn about doing that. It's kind of too much for me to go over right now, but if you want to represent in 3D, you get your objects in there and put them where they go. So is the question more of how to represent it in 3D space, or how to render effects to it?
More how to render effects to it.
Well, I guess it depends on like, are you, you can, let's say you have 10 different lights. You can have groups and subgroups, and depending on how you drop your effects, you could turn on each light individually just by dropping effects on those individual lights. Or you could drop whole house effects on them. But then if you've got modeled in 3D, you're going to be able to, if you get everything tuned where the lights actually point the way they do in real life, you're going to be able to see, what that looks like. I don't know if you've played around with that yet or not.
Yeah. And then we also have pixel matrices in the walls and ceiling and floor.
Right. Those are probably going to work better if you drop effects on each matrix individually instead of trying to do them all together, because if they're all facing different angles, there's no good way to render onto all of them at once.
Okay.
I mean, you can try it, but what'll happen is, let me just jump back. Which view am I in? Am I in that one? I didn't think I was in that folder. Okay, yeah, I just want to get back to a blank really quick. So let's say let me just draw a few matrices here. And then we'll see what happens, just to experiment. See what time, still got 9 minutes. So let's assume those were pretty close to different walls. And let me just select each one and line it to the ground. And now create a sequence. And let me make a group just so I can see what they do in the group. Since I added that later, I have to come over here to add to the display. So you can see what's happening there. See how it looks really stretched on those side walls? It looks more stretched than it does here. I don't know if that's coming across, but so yeah, you could do that, and you could see what the users in the room are going to see, and that's what's pretty cool is then you could come up here and pan around and see like what is that going to look like.
That's super cool.
But you could come in here and say, well, I'm going to drop something on this guy. Yeah, see how that comes out looking different than I expected, actually. I don't know why that's looking like it's per preview to me. I expected that to render and look like I was looking at it directly on. Yeah, as you see, sometimes I have to experiment myself just to try to get things to do what I want. Yeah, because I don't expect that to change based on angle if I drop it on just that one guy. Let me just spin that around and see how that affects it. Yeah, see it does. Why is that angle changing it? That's a, oh, my render style is on per preview. So if that's on default, then I should be able to go in here and put that perpendicular. And now it looks proper. So see how that's going to look probably a little bit more nicer than if you have this one where the two sides are going to be stretched out. So putting individual effects on each one gives you a different result than putting a single effect on all three.
Yeah.
But without the 3D preview here, I don't think it'd be easy to tell, what you were going to see. But you could, in that case, what some people would do is just, well, I'm going to forget about 3D and I'm just going to, put all my stuff flat in here and render to that. And then in the room, these things will obviously be turned. So this is the way we used to do it. We used to not worry about, things that were at other angles, and we didn't try and make our preview look exactly like the way things were laid out. And we just said, I'm just going to render to this in 2D and know that it's going to be moved around, when I get out into my yard. Let's see. All right, I just don't see any more questions. Well, I'll go ahead and shut this down, I guess, and let everybody get on to, if they're jumping into another room.
I don't know. What do you think, Gil? Any more questions? I mean, you're doing a good job.
Well, I'll be here. I just got scared for a second because I was wait a minute, was I supposed to record this? I hope it's being recorded.
Yeah, it's being recorded and it's being live streamed on YouTube, and the link is an official xLights.
Okay, cool.
Let me check that link and see if there's any questions in official. I don't see any. A lot of people watching YouTube though. Well, if nobody has any more questions, Gil, do you want to maybe discuss, your involvement in xLights? We got a lot of new people that aren't familiar with it, and kind of what you do, and if you have any ideas about what may be coming in the future.
Well, let's see. I'll start with the last thing first. I never know what's coming in the future because there's not a whole lot of communication a lot of times between the developers. Sometimes things show up as a surprise, and and sometimes I hear people talk about something and I'm like, what? That got added? I kind of wanted to do that, and I didn't get any input on it, So it's amazing how good things have turned out, considering sometimes how little communication there is. And, there's always people want to see things done differently. Like I said, I got involved, I think it was back in 2015. And, I hit this thing hard where I was spending probably an extra 40 hours a week from my main job, doing xLights coding. And, I've kind of backed off from doing as much coding lately. If I see something that's like a bug that really needs to be fixed, I try to stay active, following the forum and all the bugs that get entered on the GitHub issues list. So I've stayed active the whole time following that. And if I see something I can fix, I jump into that. Yeah, a lot of people, they haven't, I haven't been on Facebook. I got off of Facebook recently. I've just always been frustrated with Facebook and not wanting to be there, and, Sean got me to join Facebook several years ago just because of the xLights group, and just being there to help support people and answer questions. And now that I'm not there, sometimes when I have come back, it's like, it's almost like I never existed, and Keith wrote the program and all that. But
Yeah, no,
there's a lot of features there. Like I did a lot of work, Dave Pitts got things started, and then I did a lot of work on the sequencer grid to get going. I did copy paste features. I'm the one that did this wizard when you go to create a new sequence. I did this whole new sequence wizard thing here. I did a lot of the stuff where
yeah, that's good if you want to show people that too. I mean, I don't think we have a class on that. If you want to run through that real quick.
I thought there's a class happening right now, isn't there?
Well, Keith is going to talk about auto sequencing. I don't know where he is. I don't know if that's what it is, but
yeah, because it's pretty much. Aren't we at the end of the time now? 11
well, we have till 2:30, but we can open this up to.
Oh, there's a gap. Oh, okay. I thought he was right after me, back to back.
Take your time, Gil.
Yeah,
I was done. I've been trying to to answer questions for
Yeah, no,
half hour.
No, that's okay. You're done. You're done at 2. You're pretty much done now. We have a little break, but I'd just like to thank Gil for teaching his class as he did last year. He was very instrumental, if not the main developer, to get us into the 3D category for xLights. And for all you new guys that may be on here now, this may be one of the few chances you get to ask Gil directly any questions. So. We have a few more minutes left. Don't hesitate if you want. Unmute yourself if you like.
Hey, Gil, I got a question.
Yep.
Is there any work on the DMX moving heads that have the color wheels as opposed to LED to make those actually show up in the visualizer?
I can say there's no work. I'm trying to imagine what you would want to see there.
Like, because if it's an LED light, then in the visualizer the colors will show up. But if you have a color wheel, since it uses DMX values for color,
oh yeah,
it doesn't show up.
Yeah, I don't think it ever will.
Yeah, there'd have to be something tying it to know that. Yeah, it's just there's so many things you can do with DMX objects. It's hard to try to represent everything. You know, we tried to represent some of the standard stuff.
Yeah, no, I understand. If it's, I'm sure it's not an easy task for a small handful of us that are using it.
Yeah, because you'd have to. I mean, I'm sure you'd probably like to be able to drop red on there and have it move your filter wheel, right?
Yes, that's exactly it. Instead of, because I know you can do it with states, but then you'd have to set up the states and everything for every sequence. It just seems a lot of work, and I'm lazy.
The challenge is it'd move a bunch of complexity onto the model, because we have to go in and say, well, this position or this set of numbers is this color, right? And then you end up with half positions where people like to put the color wheel halfway across, and I'm not sure how much more usable it would be. And it would definitely make calculating the node color difficult. Can you imagine, Gil? You'd get the red color from the effect, and then you'd have to map it to some random value or some value range on the model. It would be a nightmare.
There would have to be a whole bunch of tables. You know, there's people who sell expensive programs to do all that stuff too, you know, and so we're right now, you know, moving heads are just a small piece of ours.
Yeah, I figured it'd be just a small community of us that would use it. Yeah. So I can understand.
All right, Chad, one more question. Chad Meyer, do you have a question for Gil? Chad, your hand's up, Chad. That's why I asked.
Maybe he gave up. Somebody asked if there are plans for additional server features.
Well, go ahead, Chad.
I already asked my question. I just didn't put my hand down.
Okay. Well, listen, Gil, thank you very much again, and thanks on behalf of Bosco Studios for the presentation. You go over above and beyond, and I'd like to thank you again. And next up is going to be Keith Wesley for an xLights overview at 2:30. So we have a little break now. I don't know if you all got to jump on any of the rooms or whatever, but thanks again for